The next session is it's called Virtual Secrets: What Youth Sports Can Learn from Video Games. You know, what's interesting is in the last session we covered some of this ground, but there really are two Americas out there. There's underserved America and overserved America, and the barriers are quite distinct. In underserved America, places like inner city Baltimore, where I've done some reporting, you have a lack of viable parks. You know, federal funding for parks has been cut dramatically. A program called UPAR, which funded urban parks, has disappeared entirely. You have slashed recreation budgets. You have a lack of volunteer coaches. It's a real struggle to find people to coach these kids, and then there's often the idea that, well, can we really ask them to be trained as well? So do they? You're missing the number as well as the quality of coaches in communities like that. You have safety and transportation issues. Parents are sometimes reluctant to let their kid, you know, walk 3, 4, 8 blocks away where they might have to go through some rough neighborhoods, pass by some drug dealers or otherwise. So how are they going to get there? And then you have one of the speakers referred to it in the last panel. You have the issue of large schools. You know, some of these schools have 3,000 students, and they have one basketball team for the boys and the girls. 80 kids will try out, 15 will make it, 8 will get playing time. You know, so a lot of kids are just structurally pushed aside, and that's a term I use here, structural, that we really should be thinking about in the course of the day. And I know everybody is already, because it's really not my conclusion in the course of my research in the book and otherwise is a lot of these problems are structural. They're not necessarily moral failings or because parents are just jerks or anything. It's just a lot of people are placed in a lot of awkward positions, and they act poorly or they act desperately, and we end up with some of the headlines we have in the paper. You know. Now the barriers in overserved America are different. You know, they're the communities that my kids are in, and I suspect most of the people in this room are in, and they are. These are the kids who are being fed sports with a fire hose in many cases. There are exclusionary policies where they have the money for uniforms and teams and travel and so forth, and coaches say, well, let's create these third grade travel teams that begin to segregate who we think are going to be the next generation of you know, athlete entertainers, even if it's just on a community level or otherwise, from the kids who can't make the grade. In fact, I think if you remember that chart, and it is in your packet, by the way. Some of these slides are in your packet if you want to take them home. It's interesting. In sports like soccer, it falls off a cliff right around age 8 or 9. I have no proof of this, but I got to wonder how much of that has to do with every community in the country now creating third grade travel teams and pushing a lot of kids aside. You've got pressure from parents and coaches. You've got excessive demands on the family, where they say, like, we can't do all these. I just don't want to disrupt all our family dinner, 5 nights a week. It still matters to me to have my family together. And then you often see this win-at-all-cost mentality where the coaches of these teams get so focused on winning the championship, and they take their cues from perhaps some win-at-all-cost coaches and messages that are coming down from elite sports. That they end up creating environments that aren't necessarily kid-friendly. And then because of all these games and tournaments and so forth, we're seeing, I don't know if epidemic is the right word, I'm not a medical person, but we're seeing a rash of concussions. We're seeing a lot of overuse injuries, especially with girls. I mean, Nancy can talk about that. I mean, girls have a much higher rate of blowing out their ACL ligaments. And they become inactive sometimes after that happens. And then you simply have burnout. Kids who've been playing since age 5 or so, they get to 14 or 15, and they've been doing this year-round, one sport, and they're like, you know what, I'm done. I just want to play the guitar and chase girls. It happens. I've come across kids who get to 17, and they have scholarship offers from NCAA schools worth $200,000, $300,000, and they choose not to take them because they're just done. But the one common barrier that both underserved and overserved America have is no one asks the children what they want out of a sports experience, right? I mean, nobody ever says, you know, nobody does exit surveys, entry surveys. You know, what is a local soccer or baseball board doing? It's adults talking to other adults saying, okay, this is what we think the season ought to be like, and this is how we should divvy up teams. And, you know, we really want to go for the state championship this year. And they end up never really talking to their consumer. But one group, but there is a group out there that really does talk to its consumer quite a bit, and that is the video games industry. Why? Because it's in their best interest to do so, to know exactly how to create competition-friendly environments for kids. And so I'm going to bring in Mark Hyman to lead that discussion. Mark is a contributing writer for the New York Times, a professor at GW locally, and is working on another book too, I think, right?
Thank you, Tom. I wanted to tell you a little bit before we get going about a story that I did write for the Times that I think speaks to this issue about what we know about what kids want from sports and more importantly, what we don't know. About 18 months ago, I got a call from a dad in Darien, Connecticut, basically querying me, asking me if I'd be interested in writing about a project that his son had been involved in. His son Peter, who was I think 14 or 15 at the time, decided that he wanted to go around to all of the leagues in Darien and ask kids and present them with a survey with 10 or 11 questions on it and solicit from the kids why they played sports. And that the questions, or rather the answers that were on the sheet were, you know, things like to get a college scholarship, because I love to win, kind of the more competitive side of the scale. But when the surveys came back, what Peter discovered was at every age group, in every sport, both genders, kids answered, because I want to have fun. That was the #1 answer in every category. So I think that's an important lesson for all of us, that the input of kids is not often sought and you know, put into practice as much as it could be. So with that introduction, I'd like to turn to Todd, who is our super expert on the panel, to talk a little bit about video gaming and the extent to which it can offer lessons about ways in which we can engage kids in sports. So I begin by just asking you that, Todd. I mean, what lessons do you think we as a group can learn from the success that EA Sports certainly has had in engaging and interesting kids in sports?
Well, first, I just want to thank Tom for inviting me to this and having a session around this, because it's a really interesting topic. And I think one thing I've learned in this morning is how incredibly complicated this topic is. So, Tom talked about those that are sort of underprivileged in terms of it. What was the term you just used?
Overserved.
Overserved and underserved, right?
Which I should give credit there. That's a term that Morris Smith, who works in the program here, came up with. And it's a really great way of sort of sizing it up.
I think the interesting thing, I think most people probably look at the video game industry and say, well, that's really about the overserved portion of that. And I think it does skew that way, certainly. I think one thing, Tom asked me to, maybe we'll do some show and tell at some point, and I brought up one of those console boxes on the floor there. There are about 75 million of those in North America right now. Number of handheld devices, there's about another 70 million of those game devices. And then you take all those computers that you can access either in your own home or in other public places. You have a lot of people that have a lot of access, not necessarily those that are economically wealthy have access to video games, and it actually is a huge part of communities that you would probably think are underserved. Just to, I guess, to Mark's question, there's two two things that everyone's talked a lot about today that I think, is the reason why EA Sports and sports video games have become so popular. One is competition. I mean, I think Americans in particular have always seemed to gravitate towards competition. It's how we sort of gauge ourselves, and that's clearly a key component. The other part is fun, and we're kind of the bastion of fun, right? We're the fun sports experience as opposed to the other one. I think the two areas that that we haven't heard a lot of talk about today that I see in our research, and to Tom's earlier point, we spend a great deal of time asking the question, why are you doing certain behavior? So most of the research that I've heard to date so far today was a lot of the what. What are people doing? But I think the key thing is why. And I don't know. I know there's our research. I'm going to share some of that today, and some of it's in the handouts. But I think that's an area where we need to be asking the why are people doing it. One thing that stuck out for me from the first earlier chart was that you showed that the levels in terms of fitness from 2008 has changed dramatically from 2009. Why? What's happened in a 3-year period that would have caused that big a jump in a negative direction? Maybe you can then try to figure out what the solution might be. So just coming back to video games, fun obviously at the cornerstone, and competition at the cornerstone, but the two things that maybe that exist there that don't exist in other places is control. So what we've learned from our research is what kids like is they like to have control over their situation. And video games, for the most part, it's changing a little bit as the age of our industry increases, is that kids understand what's in that box, and they understand what that is and how to control it. And that's something that's in their domain to control, and they can serve it up the way they want, whereas sports in a lot of other areas are really controlled by adults. So it's sports outside tend to be adult-driven, and you're told to go do something or you're given an opportunity, but then you're sort of pushed along in a direction. Video game sports is about having control yourself. And the other part is the concept of social. So if there's one thing we can learn, and maybe it's something we should think about, one thing that has dramatically changed over the last 3 years has been the rise of social networking and the concept of social. We all know that social interconnection is important to human, life, but now technology is allowing that to happen, and this is another device that allows people to socially connect to each other. And I think that is why we draw so many people together. And I was especially sort of moved by what Tab was saying about switching from the concept of teams, which is very much a us versus them, to clubs, which is much more of a social endeavor, right? You join a club to have social connections and make friends. And I think if you can find a way, as the video game industry has with making sports a social endeavor, and that's why people come to it, then they get into sports because of that social connection before they get into maybe the harder aspects of competition that can drive kids away.
What do we know, from a demographic standpoint? What's the profile of the kids who are really into sports video games?
I mean, I think at a level, they have to have some level of interest in sports, and it usually comes from the media, right? The professional, the collegiate, it's out Olympic, it's wherever it is, that's where they kind of get started into it. So they obviously have some relationship with sports. Demographically, we have a sweet spot for our games. It's probably between 20 and 30 years of age, but it starts obviously a lot earlier. And I'd say, interestingly enough, it starts kind of at the level at which that chart at the beginning, Tom, you showed, falls off. And I don't think it's necessarily a cause and reaction. I'm not trying to imply that video games are the reason why people aren't playing sports. What I think it is though I think maybe sports video games replace one of the things that they're not getting in sports. And so one thing I'd throw out there is around accessibility. So we had a lot of discussion in the morning session around people getting pushed out. Okay, I have 13-year-old twins, and a boy and a girl, and so I've seen it firsthand. My son is in the 15th percentile of height and weight, so on the smaller side, right? Very early on, he got kind of pushed out. Right around kind of 8 or 9, he was clearly not going to be the strongest or the fastest person. So how could he get into sports? Well, as it turned out, where he got into sports was through video games, because what video games do is they level the playing field. They actually give you, they value things other than just physical attributes, right? It's a different criteria set. All of a sudden, kids that get pushed out of physical sports can actually end up getting into sports because now they have maybe some ability to think, have maybe the strategic side of sports, for instance, or how to control people on the field in a virtual way. And what that does is it starts to build, and we see this from our research, a sense of confidence. So whereas in the real world they're getting told you're not good enough, therefore find something else to go do. In the video game environment, what we're seeing is it actually is building confidence in their ability to understand sport, to be part of it. And in the interesting research, and this is in the packet, is what we see is that those people who play football video games, this was research we just did last year, they are 3 times more likely to actually go play in leagues and to go play recreationally outside of video games than those that don't play video games. And so it seems to be a cycle where what we've learned is that this accessibility coming in, this social layer is what brings kids in. They get a familiarity with sport. They actually learn strategy of the sport. And then as a result of that, that gives them more confidence to actually go out and want to participate on the backside. So it's not necessarily something we were anticipating happening, but I think it's a kind of an interesting certain result of behavior of children.
So that's, I would say, counterintuitive. Most of us around the table, particularly those of us who have kids, would make the assumption that if my kid is inside playing a video game, that's time that he's not spending outside, in a more active way, and that there's kind of this tension between playing video games and playing sports. But you're suggesting something different.
Yeah, well, we're suggesting what the research is showing us, I guess, is that you need to get kids familiar with sport and inspired to play sport. And I think there are many different ways you can get people inspired to do it. I'm just saying that the people that do play sports video games, it becomes an inspiration for them to go deeper into sport. So one of the things we did this about 3 years ago with the University of Oregon, the Warsaw Sports Marketing Center. We did some research, or they conducted some research on knowledge of sport for those that play video games and those that don't. And what we found is that those that play sports video games are 70% more knowledgeable about sport than those people who actually play the real sport but just don't play it in a video form. And the reason is the number of hours that you can sometimes play in the off time, right? It doesn't have to necessarily be as a replacement, right? Kids are multitasking. If you haven't seen that research, I'm sure you have, how much they multitask, so they get so much more out of their day. So as a result of having that experience, learning what a cover 2 is, how many people in the room know what a cover 2 is and how to defeat that if you're a quarterback? Well, I can tell you that if you've been playing Madden for a year, you'll understand how to do that. And if you understand how to do that, I think you are more likely to want to go and see if you can do it in the real field, because now you have some intellectual advantage over people that maybe aren't learning it in that way. So it is a surprising finding, but that's what we're seeing from our research.
Before, I think you brought a demo that you're going to show us so that we can all play Madden together.
If you want, I can just to show you, kind of going back to the control and the social aspects. So this is beginning of Madden. And the first thing, obviously, is there's a million different ways you can play a game like this. But one of the things is setting up your teams. So if you want to, who your teams are that you're going to go play. You can set up the entire lineup. You can do trades between different teams. So you can really live in that fantasy world and really go deep into the experience. And really, like I said before, I think a key theme for us is giving kids and players of this game the ability to control what the outcome is. So we try to give that as much control as possible.
It's almost like, you jump in here, it's almost like the old pickup games, the old Sandlot games, or when the kids chose the teams.
Yeah, well,
now today it's adults who
yeah, well, you can go much further than, in fact, just picking up on the Sandlot idea. So we have play creators in here, right? You don't have to just play the playbook of your teams. You can actually go create the playbooks that you want. Another thing here is around, interconnection. So this box right now is connected to the internet through wireless, and I can play head-to-head, but we introduced this concept of team play. And so with team play, again, what you're trying to do is create that social bind. I keep on coming back to, again, Tab, I hadn't heard about it, or thought about it in this terms until you said it, but the idea of a club. And what we try to do is we try to build a club environment within this environment so that there is a support system to go do things. We always, joke from our research that what kids will tell us is that it's much better to lose with a group of my friends than it is to win by myself. And they like that security of knowing that other people have their backs. So for instance, play with friends, and unfortunately all my friends on the right there all work. So none of them are online right now, but what you would be able to do is you could go pick, and I would control the quarterback, and Tom here would control the running backs, and we got another person controlling the line, and then we're playing another team, and Tab's got the defensive line, and Craig's got the the linebackers, et cetera, and you play as a unit, you play as a team, and that creates a great social connection there. We were talking earlier, Robin, about how kids like to have a goal that is achievable and realistic, and just the key of video game design is trying to make a goal that is just right outside the area where you think you can get to, but you're going to try to. We talked earlier about how it seems like the goal is, in real world, is to just get to the pros, right? Well, that's a pretty far out goal, and it drives kind of behavior that we were talking about earlier. Our goals are a little bit simpler, and they're a little bit, they stretch, but they don't go too far. So, for instance, we rank up accomplishments, but we give things like, air show. You have to accomplish, what is it, five touchdown passes with one player over a set of games. So it's something out there that is right there. You may not be able to get it right away, but it kind of keeps you coming back. But it's not so intimidating that you kind of either shut down, or maybe in the world of the real world, you get sort of pushed ahead really, really far. Tell me when I should stop if any of this is boring people. And then in terms of just game modes, again, having creation, so you can be an NFL superstar. And
well, the thing about video games too is it strikes me when I play with my kids, there's lots of room for experimentation.
Yeah.
You can try different things over and over again, which sometimes in youth sports it's hard to do, right? You're playing in a game and you got the parents on one sideline, the coaches on the other, and you don't dribble in front of the goal, because you might give up the ball. You don't do something crazy because you get screamed at by your coach. There's sort of a disincentive in youth sports, when there are games and competitions, speaking to what you're talking about, Tab. There's a consequence to failure, where there's no real consequence to failure in this environment.
Well, I think there is some consequence because you're still in a social group, but it's nowhere like the level that I think we see with parents and with leagues and those sorts of things. And also, it doesn't last very long. There's a next game right there, and you can experience. In fact, now with the mobile devices, kids are on the bus, they're in the car, as we talked about, and they're having those experiences right there as well. So it's forgotten quicker, I would say. This is the last thing I'll just show in terms of control, but this is me. I've exaggerated some of my attributes. But you can create yourself, and you can you can have that level of control. So I think some of the key learnings, I guess, maybe just summing it up. One is that video gaming is unique in that it is something that's loved by youth, but it's also parent approved, especially sports video gaming. Right? It is safe. It's a rated E for everyone. There's wholesome content in there, and it's something that kids can either play by themselves under their own terms, or in fact can actually engage their own parents as a way of maybe connecting with them on let's say an interest that maybe the parent has, such as professional football, along with something they have an interest in, which is video games, and there can be a connection is there. So I think that the part that is parent approved, it's fun. Everyone can be awesome regardless of skill level, and there's so many games and so many teams going on that you don't get kicked off a team and have to not play. Maybe those are some of the reasons why I think people gravitate to this type of experience.
People are lined up to speak to you about this.
Okay, I'll stop.
Great. Thank you. So from a President's Council on Fitness, Sports, and Nutrition standpoint, and Daryl may come out of his seat here in a second, and we can probably, hopefully for another conversation, we'll talk about nature deficit disorder and no child left inside and those types of issues, and how are we getting kids outside. But for this specific topic, yeah. I believe everybody needs to be part of the solution. We've worked very closely, as Robin, as well as our office, working very closely with the Entertainment Software Association, which is all of you guys, to look at active gaming. So I'm really surprised you didn't talk about active gaming. Yep. So what we know is that kids are spending 7.5 hours a day in front of a screen. Yep. Okay? That doesn't mean it's all bad, because computers are good sometimes, et cetera. But if we're spending 7.5 hours of screen time per day, what I've now started talking about is sedentary screen time versus active screen time. And I think we need both.
Yep, and I completely agree. So I didn't talk yet about it, mostly because I wanted to talk about the role of the largest sector of sports genres. Right. The number one fastest growing section of video gaming is fitness. So fitness in video gaming did not exist 4 years ago at all. It is now approaching, it's probably more than a third of the business. It was started by Nintendo with the Wii Fit. EA Sports, who I work for, brought out 2 years ago EA Sports Active. We brought out EA Sports Active 2 this last year. And then maybe in an interesting partnership, we partnered with the NFL to create a product called NFL Training Camp. These are very different types of active video game interaction, as opposed to what this might be, which is more indirect, video gaming that gets kids into sport. Those products, for those that aren't familiar with them, and I decided not to bring those because that would require me to wear a gym suit and not a suit or a coat and tie. Those are products where the technology allows sensors either to be put on the person's body, kid's body, adult's body, or in the case of the Kinect, which is a new gaming system, it just senses where your body is. And that's all about aggressive physical activity. And we've seen millions and upon millions of people who those products have changed their lives. And that's, we need to do more of that. So I think, to me, I think there's two parts how video games can help with this problem. One is by our fitness products that are directed towards that, and I think the reason that the NFL Training Camp is interesting is because it wraps the idea of fitness in a license, essentially, that we all know that kids in America at least gravitate to strongly. And then I think the other part of it is the simulation-based games. We already have stumbled upon an indirect interaction between that and physical fitness. The question is, who in this room can help make that a more tangible connection?
Yeah, and I think that's part of our job, certainly, and that's why we want to work with you. I would say that, I guess as a challenge back is how can we make those mainstream, whether it's Madden, whether it's Toy Story 3, where kids can be part of the game. And so we know that the technology is out there. For example, Toy Story 3 is a hugely popular game. It's very mainstream. Kids can sit on their rear ends and do the game.
Right.
Or there's technology that their characters will not move unless the kids are stepping on a stepper.
Right.
So now the stepper's hooked up to the TV or whatever,
Yeah.
unless kids are walking or moving, their character's not moving.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, another shift
Yeah.
in the last, call it, well, really, it started with the Nintendo Wii, and then now this Microsoft Kinect, and then Sony came out with a hardware called the Move. These authentic sports motion and motion-based gaming, we are just on the starting point of that. That is the future of video gaming. Not to completely steal from Microsoft, but their tagline is you are the controller, and that's where we are going, and that's why we developed products like EA Sports Active, and why we did NFL Training Camp, and why we're doing, for instance, our Tiger Woods golf product, which is certainly not at the same physical fitness level as you would get in a fitness product like NFL Training Camp, but still just the fact that now you actually swing the club. Or the virtual club inside your house. That's where our industry is going, and that's why something like the Nintendo Wii became, the dominant platform, is because it figured that out first, and now others are quickly following.
But let me jump in here real quickly, because we at 11:40 we're going to start our one-on-one conversation with Scott, and it's live webcast, and there are going to be people who are dialing in, so we have a limited amount of time here. I want to get in a few voices. First of which is Apollo. Why did you play sports, and what was the environment like when you entered speed skating? And I also want you had a nickname when you were younger too, right?
I did.
Tell me that story.
Well, first off, I was involved in sports primarily because my dad was trying to keep me out of trouble. And so, every single day after school, he would try to enroll me in as many activities as possible to essentially tire me out so I couldn't get into trouble before I went to sleep. Which at that age, actually, I still had plenty of energy, so it didn't work entirely. But sports for me was really an outlet, which at the time when I was at that age, I was a very young teenager, it taught me a lot about structure, discipline, and obviously, everyone here at this table knows exactly why athletes and athletics is so good to kids. But for me, it really was an outlet outside of the life that I could potentially fall down towards. Like myself and many other athletes that I've come across in so many years, my father was my backbone in pushing me in the right direction. And I was at an age, the middle school age, in which I could be pushed towards a positive direction or a negative direction. And just the slightest touch or movement would push me in the wrong way. And I actually was headed towards the wrong path for a number of my years. I was hanging out with the wrong crowd and doing a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing. Luckily, I chose sport, and sport essentially chose me. When I was younger, I was actually a swimmer before I ever turned to Olympic speed skating or knew anything about the Olympic sports. And my nickname as a kid was Chunky, and because I was chunky. Not because of, I was eating bad food, but because I would eat essentially anything that was put in front of me all the time. I just had an insatiable appetite for just food in general. And, without activity, I was a heavier kid, just genetically. And so I remember the first time I ever went to an actual competition, I was a little bit heavier than the other children, and I was more talented. I just had a better talent for short track speed skating, but I was just heavier. And even in swimming, it's not it's not the most comfortable sport if you're heavier. You're not wearing much, so you kind of everyone sees it,
Well, that really speaks to the issue of once a kid is overweight, how hard it is for them to re-enter the system, because there are a lot of cultural and it's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing, and middle school can be a very rough. It was a very memorable age, but it can be a very rough age for kids. If you're not the most liked, if you're not the most popular, if you're not a captain of a team, if you're not the most good-looking kid, kids kind of have no filter at that age. And so, you know, sports allowed me to really, I think, express myself that I could never do inside the classroom. And, you know, video games, in a sense, was another one of my outlets. You know, I was a big video gamer when I was a kid, but I also played sports just, you know, as equal time spent inside than I was outside. But I just, you know, for me, I just want to say, you know, sports was such an integral part of my life. And the life lessons that I learned through sport, looking back now, are irreplaceable. And they accelerated my learning curve, I think, for life lessons that normally I would have not have experienced if it were not for sport. You know, I was one of the few. I joined my Olympic training program when I was 14 years old. I was very young. I moved away from home, and I had been training for essentially almost 15 years in my sport. But the athletes that I got to come across, the coaches that I was interacting with, and just the overall experiences themselves was amazing. And I think regardless of skill set, whether a child is very good at sports or he or she is just not very, you know, doesn't have a lot of talent, that's not necessarily the most important thing. I think it's just to be able to get them to play and understand and you know, have that interaction and understand the concepts and the values of, you know, what we call Olympianism, and what that means to every single child. And I think the values of Olympianism and what the Olympics stands for me, is the same values that we stand for as a country. And so it allows us to, I mean, every single parent or child has difficulty at some age, right, of getting through those messaging systems. And sport is one of those that they hear it from outside or external factors. So they listen differently. I mean, the values that my father would try to push upon me and force upon me when I was, you know, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, I wouldn't listen to my father, but if it came from my coach or it came from another athlete, I would absorb it much differently. So it was an integral part of my learning system as an athlete. And you know, I learned about how to take care of my body, to learn about how important sports and nutrition and fitness is now. You know, I mean, many years past when I first began a speed skater.
I'd like to ask Steve Keener to jump in and talk a little bit about, you know, Steve is involved in Little League Baseball, which is a traditional organized team sport. What are you seeing in terms of enrollment numbers in Little League, and what do you think we can learn? You know, are kids as engaged as they could be, and what can we learn from the video gaming industry, do you think?
Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to join you. Someone once told me the best Little League team would be a team of 9 orphans. So you get to the heart of many of the issues with that statement. We've learned one thing from the video game business, and that was to develop our own. And we actually have a Little League World Series video game now with, unfortunately, a competitor of EA Sports. But we were convinced for some of the same reasons that Todd explained that it would be a nice addition to our program to offer that type of a product to kids who want to participate. So we did that. I listened all morning so far, and folks going around the room, and I'm going to defend my good friend John Butler, who's here, president of Pop Warner Football as well. That unfortunately Pop Warner Football and Little League Baseball get thrown into the pot as the sort of the generic term used for all of youth baseball or all of youth football. And as I heard people like Coach Robinson talk and Tom McMillan, who I have the distinction of being in the high school gym to watch one of his last high school games when he played for Mansfield High School in Pennsylvania.
10 years ago.
10 years ago. In many of the things that were being discussed, I actually felt very good about because we're doing them. And I don't think anybody knows about it. And I was telling a young lady who, and I'm sorry, I think it's Roxanne, I don't know if she's still here or not, with the USA Today, who talked to me during the break. And I said, starting this weekend and going through the next 6 weeks, Little League Baseball has a program designed specifically, which we call the Little League Urban Initiative. It's a program to benefit those underserved kids in communities that are disadvantaged. And for the next 6 weeks, we're going to be hosting Little League Urban Initiative jamborees in Los Angeles and Tampa and Atlanta and other cities, and nobody knows about it. And yet we're working very hard to try to give a segment of children who probably need Little League more than many suburban and rural kids an opportunity to play. We have a Challenger division, Eli, which is a program designed specifically for disabled children. We have over 15,000 kids in that program today. And they're playing baseball and softball. In fact, one of the rule changes we're going to make because people are being underserved is that we used to require the participation to end when they turn 21. And we're going to create a division that goes beyond that and allows them to play into their adult lives because it's been so good for them to play. So my point is, I think there are a lot of good things being done. I just think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know about them. Mark, you've been critical. Tom, you've been critical of my organization for televising the Little League World Series. I won't apologize for that. I haven't apologized to either one of you for it. I'm proud of the fact that we do that because it generates revenue to our organization, and I'm not ashamed of generating revenue. What I'd be ashamed about is if we didn't use it the right way. And for example, Coach, we took $500,000 from our television rights deal with ESPN and developed a free online coaches resource center, which is available to any youth baseball coach to come on and get coaching tips and how to run a practice, all the things that they need to do to be that coach you want them to be. But people don't know about it. And I really think I joke about the 9 orphans. Probably a Little League team of 9 kids, 7 of them you probably are glad to have their parents around. Maybe 2 of them you would not be. But we've learned a lot over the years. We've actually done our own market research. We utilized a group called the Geppetto Group, which told us that there are 3 types of kids on a Little League team. And these are their terms, not mine. They're the superstars, the middlemen, and the weakest links. And the superstars, they said, you really don't have to worry about. Those are the 3 or 4 kids that are going to go on and continue to play baseball. And then there's the middlemen. Those are the kids that want to be the superstars and are kind of close to getting there. But it's those last 3 or 4 kids on the team they called the weakest links that are the ones that really need the attention. And the research showed that it's coaching, that those kids get ignored by coaches very often because they don't demonstrate some of the skills that are needed at that very early age. And so what we've tried to do is tailor some of our programming around those kids that are, quote, the weakest links. And I know you have a time constraint. I could go on all day.
Good, you watch the clock.
All day.
That's great. I really do appreciate it.